Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Ghost Stories from the World with Omen. Today is our last stop in Indonesia. And we're going to be talking about, let me see if I can say this correctly, the Kuntilanak. Kuntilanak. Probably one of the most feared of ghosts, especially in Java. Kuntilanaks are supposedly created when a woman dies whilst pregnant. They appear as tall, pale-skinned women dressed completely in white with thick hair covering their faces. She gives off a quiet, childlike cry when she is near, but when she is far, you can hear her howling. When she appears, at first you notice a fragrant, flowery smell. But suddenly, this changes to the smell of rotting flesh. Now, there's some more stuff here. We're going to go ahead and get into it. Just a little bit more reading, I should say, so that we can bless you with the knowledge that is that of the Kuntilanak. Now, the Kuntilanak or Pantilanak is often described as an astral female spirit. Another version of this figure is a woman's spirit with long, sharp fangs and fingernails. It is similar to the spirit of a woman unable to give birth while her stillborn child was inside her womb. This figure is mainly known to reside in the Kalimantan region containing the city of Kuntilanak. The Kuntilanak can disguise herself using the appearance of a beautiful woman to lure her prey. In Malaysia, lore depicts them as vampiric bloodsuckers that dissect through the internal organs of men. The Kuntilanak is often depicted as a beautiful woman with pale skin, red eyes, and long black hair. She is often dressed in a blood-smeared white dress. The Kuntilanak is also described as changing into a more monstrous form when she captures her prey, which is typically men or helpless people. Because she is bloodthirsty and has a carnivorous nature, a Kuntilanak can also appear as a beast or a ghost resembling a Dracula-type vampire. Now, the Indonesian Kuntilanak is similar to the Kuntilanak in Malaysia, but commonly takes the form of a bird and sucks the blood of virgins and young women. The bird, which makes a ki-ki-ki sound as it flies, may be sent through black magic to make a woman fall ill. The characteristic symptom being vaginal bleeding. When a man approaches her in her female form, the Kuntilanak suddenly turns and reveals that her back is hollow, much like the Sundal Bolong, the prostitute ghost with her large gaping hole on her back. A Kuntilanak can be subdued by plunging a sharp nail into the top of her head. Now that, my friends, is pretty damn gruesome. I mean, could you imagine the surprise you might have if you were just like walking around bird watching and shit, right? Some bird flies past that you've never seen before, singing a song that you've never heard. Kee, kee, kee. Then all of a sudden, bam. Kuntilanak pops out and fucking kills you. Now, this, folks, seems like a story which probably goes way, way, way back. In fact, I would find out just how far back it went. And I was quite surprised at what it was that I found. And you'll be surprised too. Now, history has it, and you're probably wondering how I found this out. This time, I did my own fucking research and decided not to bother with any questioning of regular villagers or city folk in the Indonesian countryside. I didn't want to stress them out, and I didn't want them looking at me as some tourist that they could rip off for fun. So, kept to myself. That's what I did. And I did some research. Went to a library, looked up some stories, tried to find, you know, maybe some old editorial notes or possibly some short stories, something like that. Something where somebody was writing something with the label of fiction, but hoped a guy like me would figure out that these things were most likely true. So that's what I did. Hopped and started finding different things that were telling me the things that I wanted to hear, which was that this legend of the Kuntilanak went back far. Let me take you back there, right? Now you're probably saying, oh, he's going to try and say that the Kuntilanak doesn't exist. Yes, it does. It's just not formed, or originally wasn't formed, in the way that you think, right? And you'll see as things come together what I mean. Now, long time ago, long before men and women understood, men and women, obviously women had their monthlies. Let's just keep it PG-13 if we can. And we know that I'm going straight to R in a minute, but right now we're going to keep PG-13 for the sake of passing along some information that may be beneficial to somebody who may be watching, right? Bam. Monthlies, right? Now, during this time period, I'm quite sure these uneducated folk had absolutely no idea what was going on. At first, it might be assumed that one was probably dying. They were treated with care, right? Then they realized that they weren't dying, so they were confused. They got better, everything was fine. Some of them, obviously because of menstrual cramps, would be in pain, which would then lead to them thinking that these women were in some type of, medical distress, although they didn't understand medicine. So they would just think that they were dying and bleeding from the area from which they would put things in from time to time. Anyway, right, so here we go. Bam. This keeps going on. The men are noticing this, right? They're like, what the fuck? This is weird and strange. We don't like it. We don't like it, right? Now, every now and then, there'd be a woman, of course, for whatever strange reason, call it a genetic mutation of sorts, call it being barren, who could not and did not have a menstrual cycle, right? So she didn't do this all the time. And enough of these women became available over time that it was starting to see. Now remember, there's not large groups of these people, right? So, it's not that this happens all the time. That you're going to find tons and tons of women without menstrual cycles. So they were the rarity, right? And they didn't understand it. No one understood it. So there's a bunch of people not understanding stuff. But time continues to go by, right? Now, problem is that the men understood the cramps and they understood the bleeding to a certain degree. They understood that it was going to happen and that they would have to get used to it, right? The women realized that, hey, it kind of happens around the same time all the time. So we can kind of figure this all out, right? So there we go. The menstrual cycle is now named the cycle of vaginal bleeding for no reason, right? They didn't understand what it was doing. Now, PMS, folks. PMS. PMS is where the Kuntilanak comes from. Well, let's think about it, folks. A raging hormonal female, I don't want to use the B word, don't want anybody angry, but a raging hormonal female can seem very similar to a monster. I know men have dealt with these women before. All men have. Other women have dealt with these women. They're emotional. What were some of the fucking descriptions that they gave of this Kuntilanak, right? Right? Bleeding vaginally, right? Right? Okay. Crying like a baby when up close, whimpering. But from a distance, you can hear the howling, right? Okay. Perfect example. Where all three of those things fit into what I'm talking about. Vaginal bleeding. You wake up in bed. Your girl, wife, friend with benefits, or just the girl of the night wakes up. Oh, she's crying, whimpering up close in your ear. Bloody vagina, up close, childlike whimpering. You get up because you don't want to hear this shit. You already know what it is. You know what it is. You walk out the door, and from a distance, you hear the howling and the anger. Oh, God, you're so insensitive. Ah. The Kuntilanak. Kuntilanak was born from the first raging PMS-having female. Men didn't understand this shit, and they weren't going to have any of it. They weren't. Since they didn't understand what it was they were dealing with, they took this woman and they stoned her to death. The first case, PMS, was stoned to death women. Now I know men are probably like, yeah, so why does it still go on to this day? Well, I'm going to explain to you why, right? Now I know what you're thinking. There had to be other women with PMS. Yes, there were tons of them. Tons of them. But they did what a lot of women do, which is they would suffer it in silence. And men learned to accept this. You know, they weren't trying to run red lights anyway, but they would still try to be, you know, caring and affectionate towards their loved one. And not make them feel gross and disgusting, even though they themselves felt, and so did the woman themselves, felt gross and disgusting. But they both tried to play it off as if neither one of them felt that way. But when woman was where she did not want you to speak to her at all, and she gave you the look, well, then you knew she had the potential to turn into a Kuntilanak. Now, how the Kuntilanak became a ghostly creature, my friends, well, it comes from the fact that they stoned the very first. Right? It used to just be a joke. You'd be like, oh, God. Hey, Jim, I am so glad I am out of the house today. He'd be like, why? What's going on? It's like, yo, my wife is being a fucking straight Kuntilanak, my friend. You know what I'm saying? Straight Kuntilanak. Like, no, really? Dude, last month, when my wife was acting like a Kuntilanak, I swear to God, I was about to beat her upside the head with the sugarcane fucking stick. I was furious. But then, you know, I understood that it's, you know, that thing that could possibly happen. So I did what most men suggest that we do, Joe, which is just leave her alone. But it was too late, you know. It was too late. Once they had stoned this first Kuntilanak to death, that wasn't enough for them. Some men were totally angry at the fact that she existed in the first place, and they became extremely indignant and started pissing on the pile of rocks that was on top of this poor woman's crumpled body. Crumpled. You understand what I'm saying? I want you to understand and visually see a crumpled woman being pissed on while under a bunch of rocks. It's fucking mean. And as if it could get no worse. It did get worse, right? Because of course I'm thinking in my head, why do these female ghosts always go after men? Like, what the fuck did we do? And then I find out what we did, and I understand it. You know, I understand it. It's not just like a, oh, we're girls and you're guys thing. It's like, oh, I'm a girl and a guy, bunch of guys, did some really fucked up shit, bashed me in the head with rocks. Can't really tell one guy from the other, just saw a big crowded blur of men. So she doesn't give a fuck now who she kills as men. She kills men. And she doesn't do it by seducing them. No, not at all. Not at all. It's kind of like Final Destination and shit, you know? Once she has targeted the victim that she sets out to consume, because she does consume their souls, well, she likes to set up these intricate sets of events which lead to an ultimately terrible demise, with them being crushed by something in some way or another. And you're probably saying to yourself, like what? Well, I'll give you some examples of some of the documented by, people who document paranormal killings, such as myself, documented evidence of this Kuntilanak in action, right? There was this priest once, she had found out that he was a dude, and that was enough for her. So, while this priest's walking through the field, just on his way to his parish to do what priests do, hopefully not what priests do when they shouldn't do it, but what they should be doing. Let's hope that's what he was doing. Maybe he wasn't, but we'll never know, because out of the sky fell a piece of landing gear from a plane. It was malfunctioning, just so happened to be flying over that area at the time when the wheel fell off. Now I know what you're thinking. That's not gonna happen, because if it was over him when the wheel falls off, it's gonna travel with the speed of the plane, and it's gonna miss him by like a million years and shit. Yeah, it would if the Kuntilanak was not an issue. But she is. So that fucking piece of landing gear, now you're probably saying, that just sounds like a freak accident. How can the Kuntilanak be blamed for such? Well, because when it happens, she's usually seen near the dead body. Now, of course, she's not seen by the naked eye, which is why not everybody knows about it. Usually, the people who are taking pictures of the scene of the crime are the ones who are documenting these events, which is why I say documented. Now, of course, they're not going to say, oh yeah, there's definitely a ghost there. They're going to shut the fuck up. They're going to shut the fuck up. They don't want anybody saying that they're fucking crazy. Could you imagine that? Being labeled crazy in a place where crazy is probably not. I mean, from my travelings in Indonesia, I didn't see a whole bunch of fucking crazy ass people just like walking around willy-nilly being crazy like in New York and shit, right? So I'm assuming, from my short stay there, that they're pretty live, let live, let's be chill, calm, relaxed, not too much on the crazy, we don't want that here type of people, right? That's what I'm getting. Anyway, though, so that was one, example of where that shit happened. Another time that was documented, of course, by, crime scene fucking accident reconstruction photographers, was a terrible, terrible, terrible accident. Driving on a highway, the guy was, right, pothole he hit, and it fucked up his axle, right? The bridge that he was on was not a huge bridge, but it was pretty high up. What ended up happening is he went off the side of the bridge, right? And as he did, the rear tire caught the rail and made it so his car swung under the bridge, right? And then landed on the shallow water under the bridge. You're thinking, that's pretty fucked up, but he didn't get crushed yet. You didn't let me finish. So at that moment, the bridge, for some strange reason, becomes structurally unsound, collapses right on top of the car and the dude, crushing him. Smush, like a bug. Of course, when they're taking pictures of the scene, the Kuntilanak appears in the photo near the wreckage. Another time, warehouse area, guy was putting tennis balls, big containers of tennis balls in their individual little stacks into, the shelving. And out of nowhere, for no reason that they can find to this day in their investigation, the whole entire unit, the shelving units responsible for keeping these large shelves up against the walls so that the weight distributes evenly downward and not forward, failed. And 100 million tennis balls fell down on top of this man, crushing him to death. And once again, she was seen in the photographs that were taken of the area. Now, of course, you don't want to see her with your naked eyes, because if you do, that's probably your ass. Now, I'm going to assume, right? I'm going to assume that, that's what happens. And the only reason we don't know for sure is because the people who have seen her or dies, they're dead. They get crushed to death. And seeing her in a photograph isn't the same. It's not like she can come out of the photograph and fucking kill you and shit. Now, there are a small group of people who take the Kuntilanak extremely serious. All right. Some of you call them woke. They're not woke at all. See, they figure, right, to combat the Kuntilanak from killing men willy-nilly, they have to change the way the world is. So that's why men can be women now. They figure the Kuntilanak will walk up on a dude and see the dude can be like, hey, wait a minute, hold up. I identify as a woman, therefore I am. Unfortunately, it did not work that way. And there's documented proof that there was an instance in which this man who identified as a woman was found murdered, crushed to death by dildos and pocket pussies. I'm not making this up. You can Google it. Here's a story. Man crushed to death. Kuntilanak's picture taken. Yeah, but you don't want to see a Kuntilanak. You don't. It's not. Especially if you're a guy. Now, I am not sure if, for those of you who may be curious, because you might be like, well, hey, I'm a dude. How do I make sure that I don't get killed by a Kuntilanak either? All right, first things first. Easiest way not to have to worry about being killed by a Kuntilanak is don't go to Indonesia. Like, don't go where they are. If you're not where they are, they won't be where you are. And then you won't have to worry about being killed by one, right? Perfect. Perfect. Right? And that's as far as I know. I'm not sure if they've learned how to travel, the internet through phone waves or swim or just use whatever ghost travel like the flying coffins that I told you about. I mean, they could, I guess, potentially fly across the Atlantic Ocean or Pacific or whatever ocean they felt like in a flying coffin since the coffin is flying. But then they would have to go all the way to Indonesia to catch a flight. I mean, maybe they might do that. That'd be. I have to ask one of the other ghosts that I see about that whole flying coffin transport thing, and not a kuntilanak, because I don't want to see one of those, at all. Anyway, folks, yeah, another one of those interesting stories. Now, I'm done here in Indonesia, and I'm ready to start my travels once again. I haven't decided yet where I'm going. I had someone say, hey, why don't you check out Germany? Germany's got some ghost stories for your ass. I said, I'll check it out. See if I can find 5 ghost stories from the old German collection, from the countryside, the hills, the mountains, the valleys and trees, forests, woods, flowing the creeks, rivers, brooks, into the ponds, lakes. If you like ghost stories from the world with Omen, well, please give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it if you do. And if you want to be notified when stories, other content makes its way onto the channel, well, go ahead and click the icon. Until our arrival in Germany,